if a company would pick up on this, they would instantly become a world conglomerate, probably 200 years advanced over where we are now, because that's what my father and General Trudeau estimated where we are right now. We're 200 years ahead of where we should be. It's a different timeline. Russia came down. He and General Trudeau, my father, used to sit and laugh at the Russian inventions, he said. They would try to put an SST up, or they would try to put a space shuttle up. They would imitate ours, and it would look like one on the outside, but it didn't have the electronics, and it was a joke. The same with the aircraft. The aircrafts that defected, the MiG-15s that defected to Japan, they were made out of steel, and they had the miniature test tubes still in them when we were already in the computer age. Fiber optics came out of this. My dad said he held the first ones in his hand, and he says they didn't know what they were. They thought they were some kind of wire. But we haven't quite got there yet, because when he closed his hand around it, it began to glow. So it had something to do with the biology of the body. The same thing with the night viewing. The night viewing originally was the lens. The little gray has a lens that peels off, and he has two more lids underneath. He has the eyeball and then another protective lid, such as a shark has. And he would hold it up in the hallway, Dad said, and the first time they saw green images of people walking in the backgrounds and such. Now, did they give this material out? No, they did not. They would go out into the civilian market. If someone was working on night vision, whether it was a military like Fort Belvoir that was funded by them, or if it was a General GE or whoever it was, they would not give them the technology, but they would see how far they already got. For instance, the first laser, as you know, probably, I guess many of you have also seen the recent History Channel hours that was made on my father's technology. The first part of it was very good. The second part debunked it completely. But that's all right. Controversy is good. It sells books. Wonderful. Keep it up, Stan Freeman. They would send this material out. They would fund the companies that had already started working on it. The first laser is as big as this stage. Within 3 years, it's down to a pencil size. Now, what they would do is they would fund them, and they would tell them that it was possible to make a laser hand size. Then, if they began to flounder or fumble or not make it, then they would bring the artifact to them, let them hold it, let them see it, let them research it, and then take it back. So it wasn't reversed engineered that the artifact was thrown in their lap and say, go at it, boys. It wasn't that at all. Here's the most important part. Since they wanted to hide this from Stalin, and my dad felt that we were greatly infiltrated at the time, Stalin's dad says #1 mandate was to steal Roswell technology. And the way that they hid it was, not only did they tell them to invent the thing, but take credit for it, take the patents for it, and run with it. Now, think about this. Dad says that only 10% of that technology ever got into our civilian hands. Who has the rest? Well, he says part of it is just probably fumbled away and gone somewhere. The other part is the Air Force. And the #1 person that my father was against was Secretary of the Air Force, because they hog the material, they keep it in their own little brain pool, instead of putting it out to the world's brain pool, which is much larger. And they do it just where they can have superiority over the other services. How stupid. Don't you agree? Okay. Now, let's start at questions. And just go ahead. Ma'am.
Hello, my name's Deborah Warren from Kelowna, Canada. The question is not about the book, but about the publicity that happened at the time of the book's release. I've always been intrigued that they gave it kind of a straight-up interview, and then at the very end, I can't remember if it was ABC or NBC that did it, then they started to interview him, and your father started to talk about time travel and timelines, and they used that as the opportunity to write him off as a nut bar. And that was kind of like the bookend of the interview, and it's like, okay, you don't really need to pay attention to anything that's happening, going on here.
Correct.
Move along, folks. Is there anything, I mean, it intrigues me because I just finished reading Daniel Pinchbeck's book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, and it's about the change in consciousness that's coming to us right now is really about a changing relationship to time. And so it seems like this is really an important thing for us to be aware of at this time.
Yes, it is, and boy, were we upset about that. I mean, the family, we climbed all over poor Granddad for saying that, and we warned him not to. We wanted to keep it credible. We didn't want anything said about his ET encounters and such like that. Go back to 1997. Times have changed quite a bit. You're absolutely correct. I only do a conference like this every 3 or 4 years to see the difference. And there is a difference. And you people are amazing. I mean, every one of you is educated in the subject, and I haven't found any one of you that is saying things that are just totally off the wall. Everything that you say is logical, and I'm interested in it. Everyone that I've talked to. For that to stop, the media does it to create sensation. And I don't think they mean to discredit the media, but Dan Rather and such like that all belong to Skull and Crossbones and such, and they might mean it. There might be a few in there that absolutely do mean it. And whenever you're interviewed by anybody like that, make sure that you have the ground rules down. And they did discredit us quite a bit that way.
Is there any additional information you'd be able to share at this time? Because I found that the most fascinating part of the interview. It didn't really get started until he started to talk about that stuff. Is there anything you'd be willing to share with us now that he might have shared with you?
There's tons of stuff. I don't even know where to begin. Yes. I would come home from building my airplanes, and I'd be all full of fiberglass, not dressed like this, believe me. And I would sit on the floor beside my dad because I couldn't sit on the furniture. And I said, "What'd you write today?" Because he did live with us the last, what was it, Liz, 3 years? Yeah, the last 3 years when my mother passed away, and he came and lived with me and my 3 sons and my wife. And I would tell you, "What'd you write today?" So he would write stuff, and then the argument would start. And I'd say, "I know Einstein better than you, and he didn't mean that way," you know, and such like that. So yes, I know my father's subject matter more than what's in the book. Absolutely. Any particular item you would like to know about?
Well, it's the aspect of time travelers that he was starting to talk about in the interview, but they kind of shut it down.
Yeah, he had an encounter in the desert, and I guess it was the very first Men in Black. Actually, he called them Range Rovers. And what these guys, they were military. They were military men, though. They were a division of, I guess, the CIA, MPs, and everything put together, NSA, such like that. So what happened was my dad was flying back in one of the little puddle jumpers because he moved from White Sands up to Red Canyon. And he was flying back, and he saw let me go back. On his radar, he saw something doing 3,500 miles an hour in 1957. And they followed it until they thought it hit the ground. So he, the next day, was flying back, and he saw a shiny object on the ground. He didn't want the pilot to know what it was, so he told him, "Turn around, bring me back up." And he got in a staff car. He went out in the staff car and found the thing alone by himself with his gun strapped on his side. And he first sees the craft stuck into the side of a hill, the same as the Roswell ones are pictured. But it was injured, he knew, because it was fading in and then fading out, he said. And then it would fade in, and he figured that he was hallucinating because it was so hot in the desert. So he took a piece of tumbleweed, and he threw under it because he figured when it faded back in, it would crush it. And then when it faded back out, he would see it crush. But that's exactly what happened. Then he went up and he touched the thing, and he said it was cold. And then he turned and looked into the cave that was beside it, and that's where he's had the encounter with the New World, if you could take it. He asked him, friend or foe. I guess you've heard the story said here tonight. I can talk about that story now. I mean, mentally, I can talk about it. Back in 1997, if you would have asked that question, I would have just said I didn't know a thing about it and gone on. Not that I had been hushed up, but just because it was embarrassing. he got afraid